A warm welcome to you on The Gavel. I'm Linda Akibi. We're counting down days to the 2023 general elections expected to hold on February 25th. Now, as the country prepares for the polls, Nigerians are dealing with difficulties in assessing new Naira notes from commercial banks and point-of-sales machines because of a Naira notes policy of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Now, there are concerns that if this problem is not resolved, it may affect the elections in terms of voter turnout and even preparations by electoral umpire INEC. And we hope that these issues are settled significantly before the elections. Now, recently, the Senate and House of Representatives committees on INEC held a public hearing to ascertain the extent of the implementation of the new electoral law. The event was attended by representatives of government officials, as well as civil society organizations and INEC, and those in attendance shared their observations on the upcoming elections. Federal lawmakers from the Senate and House of Representatives are meeting with officials of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, to ascertain the extent of the implementation of a new electoral law. It's been almost a year since President Muhammadu Buhari signed the 2022 electoral bill into law. And since then, off-season elections, including 2 governorship elections, have been conducted using the new law. The Senate and House of Representatives committees on INEC are organizing this public hearing as the 2023 general election approaches.
You will agree with me that this is a turning point for our nation, a time to test our democracy through a seamless and peaceful democratic transition. As legislators, and with the support of the leadership of the National Assembly and the present government, we have played our part with the passage of Electoral Act 2022. The Independent National Electoral Commission has been given the required legal framework to successfully carry out this all-important document or democratic exercise. Ladies and gentlemen, let me seize this opportunity to appreciate the efforts of INEC efforts that have shown that you are conscious of the enormous task ahead of you and the expectations of Nigerians as it relates to the coming election. But we are hopeful that with the collaboration between INEC and the security agencies, election will be held in the areas concerned. Some captains of relevant security agencies are also represented in this special hearing to brief the committee on their efforts to have a successful exercise come 2025 February and March 11 this year. The leadership of the National Assembly, distinguished colleagues, permanent partners, invited guests, representatives of political parties, civil society organizations, development partners, members of diplomatic corps, and international organizations.
Civil society organizations, international observers, and representatives of political parties make their observations and recommendations to the electoral umpire.
We are all solidly behind INEC as it prepares to hold a very crucial general elections for Nigeria. There are still a lot of issues, there are still a lot of questions, but civil society is strongly in support of INEC as it prepares to hold the elections. The chairman of the Senate Committee on INEC, Senator Gaya, and the chair in the House, Senator Honorable Duku, and indeed all of the members of both committees in the Senate and House did extensive work to ensure the passage of Electoral Act 2022 in both chambers. And this was assented to by the President, and I'm happy that Senator Omowari is here and did work to ensure that the President assented to the bill. Now we're at the stage of seeing the bill being implemented. Of course, we're worried about a couple of things, especially the judiciary. That's always a constant question, and it's worrying to all of us to be able to ensure that the judiciary understands that the spirit and intention of the Electoral Act is to deal with several of the challenges that we have seen with implementation of previous electoral acts. And our hope is that the judiciary understands the intendment of the Electoral Act and cues in to ensure that its success is achieved. But we do certainly are prepared as citizens, as civil society organizations, observing every stage of the process, observing the elections, which we are looking towards happening, or the first one on February 25th of this year. And the hope we all have is that elections will hold as scheduled. The situation in the country is challenging for all of us. But what will help to reduce the tension and challenge that the country is faced with is the holding of the elections as scheduled. We would like to emphasize that because it is important for this country that we are able to deal with the crisis. We know that those who are in power today have tried their best. We want to be able to ensure that there's an election that holds, that brings in new leadership for the country, and that the country begins to prepare to deal with the serious challenges that we are faced with. I think that any derailment of that could portend even more crisis. So we're all hoping and working and supporting the Electoral Commission to ensure that elections hold on February 25th. And we know that the legislature, the Senate and the House of Representatives have a key role to ensure that a key bill that they passed, perhaps one of the most important landmark bills passed by the National Assembly, the 9th Assembly.
We need the judiciary to stand up, to be independent, and there's quite often a lot of pressure on the judiciary, so that matters. Secondly, the security, and I think there's been huge progress in independence of the various security bodies, but we really need the IGP to step out now very publicly to declare that independence, so that's something we'll be watching very closely. And of course, we're in a very tense situation with the fuel crisis and now this Naira crisis. There's a real practical implication on logistics for this. So, for example, we want to have 7 teams observing the election. If we can't access Naira, we're not going to be able to put people on the ground. So the embassies have put in a note verbal to the Foreign Ministry saying, we're not actually able to function to do our jobs and play our part in observing and so on. But of course, we're only a small part of this. If INEC officials can't get on the ground, if political parties can't get their observers on the ground because of shortage of Naira, there's a risk of a delay. And the delay, as Clement says, is going to have, I think, really serious ramifications. So the two issues are linked. There's the delay linked to practical challenges, and we have to do everything we can, all of us in this room, to try and ensure the elections can take place on time.
I also seriously think that the Electoral Act has some lacunae that has been exploited by the judiciary. We are all aware that even though the portal for electoral processes have been closed, courts are still giving conflicting judgments regarding candidates in this election, including some candidates that did not even participate in primaries that have been imposed on INEC as we speak. One of them is your president here. An electoral act that also empowers INEC to become a major decision maker for parties is not a democratic electoral act. I also want to say that the Senate should look directly into how to curb INEC power to deregister parties, because that does not promote democracy at all.
A representative of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, responds.
With the general election at hand, it is important to remind you all of the Commission's commitment to free, fair and credible elections. Our preparation is, however, fraught with challenges. There is no doubt that violence and threat of violence are major challenges to credible election in 2023. Violence makes deployment for election difficult, particularly where some of the attacks are targeted at INEC's facilities, the electoral process and participants. However, the Commission has been working with security agencies and other stakeholders to establish mechanisms to understand, track and mitigate security challenges. We are working collaboratively in the context of Interagency Consultative Committee on Electoral Security, ICSES. In all, we feel assured by the actions we have taken and our collaboration with the security agencies. The 2023 general election will proceed as planned. There is no plan whatsoever to postpone the election. Towards the 2023 general election, the Commission has been joined in over 1,000 pre-election cases as at Friday, 6 January 2023, involving inter-party elections and nominations of candidates by political parties.
While INEC assures of its readiness to conduct free, fair and credible elections, civil society organizations fear that voter apathy and disenfranchisement could be recorded because of the difficulties experienced by registered voters in collecting their permanent voters' cards. The Senate and House of Representatives Committees on Drugs and Narcotics hosted the inauguration ceremony of the National Association of Nigerian Drug Monitoring for the FCT chapter. Now, the prevalent thread running throughout the event was on finding solutions to the menace of drug abuse in Nigeria. The National Association of Nigerian Drug Monitoring, NANDROM, is now working in collaboration with the Joint National Assembly Committee on Drugs and Narcotics to combat drug abuse and peddling of illicit drugs in the Federal Capital Territory. NANDROM is also collaborating with other relevant agencies of government, such as the police, Nigeria Security and Civil Defense Corps, Nigeria Correctional Service, and the Federal Road Safety Commission, among others, towards stamping out this societal menace. Speaking at the National Assembly during the inauguration of the NANDROM FCT chapter, the Executive Secretary of the Association, Dr. Christabel Okoye, explains that the association is established to join hands with relevant agencies of the federal government to tackle the menace of drug abuse, illicit drug trafficking, and sensitize the public on the dangers of a scourge in the society.
This fight is a fight for all. We should all join hands together and achieve this goal. As members of this association, as a person, if we are really breathing in Nigeria, if we have homes, if we are mothers, if we are fathers, if we are youths, the fight is for every one of us.
She also stated that part of the mandate of NANDROM is to bring medicine dealers together in one voice and one vision, targeted at addressing the ravaging menace in the society, noting that medicine dealers are also members of the association.
I am happy to announce that NANDROM has been inaugurated in so many states: Lagos State, Abia, Delta, Kano, Enugu State recently, and now we are inaugurating FCT chapter. This is a testament to the fact that we are already winning this war against drug abuse and illicit drug trafficking and sales of government prohibited drugs.
Also speaking at the inauguration, the acting clerk of the National Assembly commended the Executive Secretary of NANDROM for constituting the FCT chapter of the association, saying that the initiative came early as there was bound to be increase in substance intake by the youths and other vulnerable people who might be tools for mischief in the forthcoming elections.
I strongly believe that there will be further suggestions on how to reduce the drug demands and prevention of the trading of dangerous drugs in our various communities, knowing fully the implication of allowing the drugs-related scourge to go on unchecked.
Representatives of various security agencies offered solutions to fighting drug-related problems in the country.
The Commissioner of Police, FCT Command CP Sadiq Abubakar, has put in place tactical team mechanism to ensure that these drugs peddlers are arrested and transferred to NDLEA for possible prosecution.
When you raid criminal hideouts, you will arrest criminals, you will confiscate drugs, and of course you will give them, you let those coming to those places to know that the police can come at any point in time and they equally will be arrested. So raiding is one of the key things we do to set to make them lose their balance and not to continue in that which they do.
Participants suggested that loopholes in the various acts establishing the agencies should be plugged through amendments by the National Assembly and adequate punitive sanctions to enable the judiciary apply the laws appropriately. We're counting down to the 2023 general elections. Now, we had a chat with Mr. Sesu Akume, who is running for a seat in the House of Representatives, to discuss INEC's preparedness for the elections.
The 2022 Electoral Act is not an amendment. It's actually a new act. The last one, the 2010 one, which was amended, was repealed and a new one enacted. So it's a new act entirely, not an amended one. But I think there hasn't been anything like it before. It's solved many of our problems, many of our electoral problems. It has novel innovations in it, like things like BVAS, electronic transmission, and so many other provisions of the Electoral Act that make stealing elections quite difficult and make transparency easier. The Electoral Act makes it easier for stealing of elections to be detected, and so many other provisions. I absolutely love the act. I think it was a bold one. I commend the National Assembly. I commend civil society that never rested for a day. I also commend Buhari for signing it into law. It's been a huge relief, a long way coming, but it's very worth it.
So, with what you've said about the Electoral Act, would you say your expectations were met? If you're looking at the act is playing out before our eyes, from the off-season elections to the voter registration, collection of PVCs, would you say expectations have been met through this act in, creating an environment for free and fairer elections?
No, indeed. With regard to free and fairer elections, the act has, to an extent, met my expectations. It has some loopholes here and there that I think need to be fixed. But generally, because of the novelty in the provisions that make stealing elections quite difficult and make it easier to attend to even pre-election matters and issues like that, I give it a pass mark. But there's still some gray areas that I feel need to be sorted out and need to be corrected. And then the other problem with the Electoral Act would be the judiciary itself, because the judiciary interprets the act, and the judiciary, whatever the court says the law is what the law is, and that's where we're going to be having problems with the Electoral Act. Like the judgments coming from the act, it makes everybody confused about where things are headed. But I would say for the act itself, it gets the pass score, and then we look forward to amendments here and there that take away the glitches. By the way, the act itself is an improvement on the previous ones and incorporating judgments of the court. And so you see that so many things the court had said were incorporated in the act to update it. And so I think it gets the pass score.
When you said there are loopholes, in the act, what are these loopholes?
There's so many of them. For instance, I have a problem with Section 29, which limits pre-election matters to people who participated in the primary. For instance, it says that for you, if someone, assuming that I know that someone forged documents and filed them with INEC, because I didn't participate in the primary, I can't take the person to court, which means someone who has forged documents, someone who told a lie, who told lies, can go scot-free simply because the co-contestants with the person in the party did not take the person to court. How do you expect, because the way parties run, they run more like fraternities sometimes. So if you limit that to only people who participated in the primary within the party, it means we're going to be having forgers in elected office. I feel it goes contrary to the provisions of the Constitution itself. That's Section 66, which states, especially with regard to with forged documents and perjury, that people who forge documents or commit perjury are not eligible for public office. Now, the Electoral Act in Section 29 limits taking this up to people who participated in the primary with the person who did that. I think that's problematic. I also have a problem with Section 84, which says that if it says if the political party violates the Electoral Act and party guidelines for primaries, it says and, that makes it conjunctive. It means it has to be both. It has to be a violation of the Electoral Act and the guidelines of the party, which means there can be a violation of the Electoral Act, but if there's no violation of the guidelines, the party's guidelines, then you don't have a case. I don't think that's right. I think it should be or. I think it should be or, not and. As simple as and or it's that important. There's also section.
Is that open for interpretation in the courts?
No, it's very clear. It's not even something to argue because it says and. And means both. And means at least both. So it should have been or. So it's either of them. But if it says and, it's not a matter of either. It has to be both. It's conjunctive, not disjunctive. So that's it. Yeah, so like I was saying, section 92 and 93 speak about using vitriolic language, using hate speech, using deploying ethnicity, religion, and so on in campaigning. The act is against it, but the act does not state who is to take it up. So, assuming that candidate A is violating the Electoral Act by using language that is unwholesome, as using language that is inciting and so on, like we've seen especially some presidential candidates do, and vice presidential candidates too do, there's no consequence for it, even though it's in the law. It needs to specify who is supposed to, or who has the local standard to take that up, who has the right to take that up in court, because there is a violation. I also would like...
So to draw you back, does this not... We have the Electoral Offences Commission too, which the Act also, empowers, and it could also fall under hate speech. We have laws for hate speech.
Yes, indeed.
This not be handled by those laws and...
Yes, I personally, the Electoral Offences Commission hasn't taken off. I personally don't support forming yet another commission because of electoral offences alone. So I would have thought it should be defined that anybody who finds that offensive should take such a person to court, or a party or contestant or any citizen who feels that the thing is offensive should be open to taking it to court. I think it should be defined instead of leaving it there because nobody is enforcing it. That's why it hasn't been enforced. It hasn't been enforced this time, and people went away, have gone scot-free with it. I commend INEC and many others who worked behind the scenes to come up with the Electoral Act 2022. I also know the kind of fight that went on about beavers, about electronic transmission and all of that, and the back and forth. At the end of the day, we have what we have here. So it's a great step. The only problem we're going to be having is with the judiciary, like I said earlier. Their interpretation of what the law says is making everybody confused. I hope we don't get more confusion going forward.
So recently, the INEC did a mock accreditation exercise, and a report has been, IAGARI released the report of that accreditation exercise. And one of the findings was that some people who registered in a particular polling unit were transferred by INEC to other polling units or polling centers, and this without prior information.
Notification.
And that this notification, and this could cause some issues on election day.
That's a fact. That's a fact. I think it ought to have been handled better because the Electoral Act provides for names of voters to be published at the polling units weeks ahead of voting. If this was done properly, and on time, it would have been noticed that people were shifted to new polling units and so on. I thought that that's supposed to be a minor issue that should have been easily resolved. I hope it gets sorted out so that people don't get mixed up on election day. I also hope that the polling units where such errors were done are close by such that people can actually move from one polling unit where they thought was theirs to the next one so that they're not disenfranchised.
This is where we call it a day on this week's edition of The Gavel. If you have any views on any of the issues discussed, please email us on thegavel@channelstv.com. Thank you for staying with us and see you again next week.